Hello. Hi everyone. Welcome to Alta Asks Live. We are thrilled to be filming episode 15, if you can believe it. This started as a kind of appropriate for today. This started as a response to the shelter in place due to the pandemic. We thought it might last 3 or 4 episodes. We are here now at episode 15. Thanks for everyone. I know we've got a lot of regulars coming back and joining us. And some Katie M. Flynn fans here today. So before we get started, I just want to let you know if you're new to this is the digital kind of live version of Alta Asks, a literary Q&A series we do at Alta Online. That is done by Heather Scott Partington. She is a book critic, a teacher, a wonderful Alta contributor, and host of this series. And today we're joined by Katie M. Flynn, whose debut novel, The Companions, is kind of set around a pandemic, which is extraordinary to have it come out during an actual pandemic. So please ask us questions. You can ask over in the comment section. Hi, Debbie, already. And you can certainly ask a question below. If you're unfamiliar with Alta, I'm about to give you a sneak peek of our Sci-Fi issue, and I'm so proud of it. Look at this binding. So please go to altaonline.com to check us out. And of course, now more than ever is a really great time to support authors and independent booksellers. If you want to check out Katie's book, there should be a green button right underneath us that will lead you to bookshop.org, where proceeds of the book will obviously not only support Katie, but support independent booksellers. So again, keep those questions coming. I see we've already got a couple. And with that, I'm going to disappear and let Heather and Katie take it away.
Thanks, Beth. How are you, Katie?
I'm doing great. How are you, Heather?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited that we're going to get a chance to talk about your wonderful novel, The Companions. And I read The Companions sort of in a binge of pandemic-related literature, so freaked me out a little bit. But it's a novel that begins in a pandemic, but that's actually not what the novel is about. So I was wondering if you could just give a brief overview of where it goes.
Sure. So when the novel opens, we're 2 years into a prolonged quarantine, 2 years of a pandemic. And it opens in a San Francisco tower where a wealthy homeschooled child named Dahlia is entertained by a 16-year-old companion named Lilac. Now, companions are the dead uploaded to machines, and they're kept in service of the living. So in effect, what you have in my book is that humans can't go out, but the dead, they can come in. So it becomes sort of this technological sort of way of connecting, which I think we're seeing in our own experiences in the way that we're relying on technology to do this event.
Yeah, it's really the pandemic has opened my eyes to, how technology can kind of bridge connections or make connections between people. But I like that your novel raises some issues too about, some of the problems that come from the technology as well. What was the inspiration for this novel? Where did the idea begin?
Sure. Well, I would say I'm working off of two ideas coming together, which is, first of all, the idea of a pandemic and a prolonged quarantine. And that idea, I would say, stems from my experience as a grad student in geography. And I was studying at the time of SARS. And at the time, I learned about the concept of endemism, which is the idea that animals can be carriers of old diseases, like, for example, the bubonic plague, and new ones like COVID. And that these diseases can jump from animal to human populations. So I think I became aware of this then, and that sort of fear has sat with me for quite a long time. And in our sort of globalized worlds, it's become a lot more likely that such a catastrophic pandemic as we're living through would occur. So I would say that's a kind of long-term, long-held interest of mine. More recently, I moved to San Francisco, and I say more recently, we're talking about 17, 18 years ago. And, I don't work in tech. I'm a teacher and a writer and an editor, but I live in Silicon Valley. So I've, been able to bear witness to this latest tech boom firsthand. And what I've observed, of course, is that it's brought tremendous wealth and growth into our city, but it's also put tremendous strain on the city. A lot of people are forced to move out. We have a homelessness crisis. There's this sort of economic bifurcation that's changing the cultural landscape of the city in ways that if I stop and think about really, make me feel, despair for the city that I moved into. Of course, change is an inevitable part of any place, but in some ways I fear that technology in the way that it's moving so rapidly is, the benefits are not being distributed equally, certainly. And what we're seeing more and more is that, in San Francisco, for example, we have more billionaires here per capita than in any other city in the world. And so it's a shocking sort of image to see so much wealth on one hand and so much poverty on the other. And I think in this pandemic, we become even more aware of the people who are left behind in this system.
Do you think that, one of the things I was thinking about as I was reading the novel is how technology, and especially now that, things like Apple new releases every year, it's a huge event. And, it feels like the technology represents a kind of wish fulfillment for us, like that if we just have the newest, best thing, then everything will be okay. Was that something that you were contending with as you were writing the novel?
Yeah, I think I've always been the last person to adopt, I shouldn't say the last person, one of the last people to adopt new forms of technology. It took me forever to get a cell phone, for example, and I just didn't want one. I didn't want people to be able to contact me in that way. And now I can't get off my phone, you know what I mean? So I see the benefits, of course, of technology in the way that we're able to connect with one another, but I am also, hyper aware of how it's changing the way I think, changing my attention, changing the way I relate to my family members, my children, and I'm skeptical of that and the benefits of that. I think it's interesting that at the same time that we've become, so infatuated with internet culture and digital culture, we're also seeing this profound spike in loneliness in our society. And so I don't think that's a coincidence. That technology and connecting with people in this way, while great, is not the same as being in flesh form with one another.
Right. And, and because your novel involves the consciousness of people who are no longer alive being put into these machines, then not only do you have the issues of the loneliness of the consumer and this, this machine being brought in to make them feel better and make them feel more at peace, but you have this consciousness that is trapped inside one of these devices and has to contend with its own, sense of being and value. And it just felt like there were a lot of things in the book. It really made me think about the value of a human life, but also the value of life to humans, if that makes sense, which I've been thinking a lot about lately. I mean, based on what's happening in the news, there's just all kinds of related to the important protests that are happening related to the pandemic. We're really looking at what is our value, and is that value, do we have systems that let people know that they have the same value as each other? And I just thought that was really one of the more powerful things that was in the story. You have a lot to change gears for just a second, you have a lot of narrators in this story. You have many different perspectives. And I was wondering if you could talk about how you approached writing from so many different, it spans a lot of years, it spans a lot of geography, and it spans different perspectives. So how did you approach working with so many different things at the same time?
Sure. Well, I would say that the first chapter of the novel, Lilac's section, is it was originally written as a short story, and so I didn't necessarily know I was going to keep going. I did, however, know that if I were to keep going, that I wanted to tell the story from many different points of view. So in the beginning, I just found different voices that I could sort of travel with through the story that would keep me sort of in line with Lilac's journey, but also introduce these new voices and experiences. So, for example, the second narrator is Cam, and she's a caretaker in an elder care facility. And, she's very isolated. She's living in Jedediah Smith State Park, which is up north near the Oregon border. And, people, because it's an elder care facility, the residents are especially at risk with the pandemic. And so families cannot visit them. And so it's into this context that companions are introduced. And the elderly quite love it because they want to hear these stories from the past, from a time that makes sense to them. In the novel, it was important to me to show these different perspectives. I wanted there to be both human narrators and companion narrators. I wanted to show companionship from the perspective of someone wealthy who had the opportunity to consider becoming a companion, because of course it's very expensive to do it, and I had to contend with that decision. I wanted people who were living in these San Francisco towers, which is where sort of wealthy live, and they're kind of, airlocked and safe up there. But I also wanted, the perspective of a young homeless child, basically, who's living on the streets and is incredibly vulnerable to becoming ill. So I wanted those different voices to tell the story, and I thought that was important for the kind of story that it is. In terms of geography, I have a background in geography and cartography. So to me, the book a lot of it is a real love letter to Northern California. I've lived here for coming up on 2 decades now, and it's my adopted home, and I'm just completely in love with it, while at the same time totally terrified for its future. In the sections that go up into the sort of the redwoods of Northern California, there's this constant risk of a brownout, of smoke coming in from a distant ongoing fire that can just blow through and really make it impossible to see or even be outside. And so that's just like one dimension of sort of this environmental future that I'm worried about because of climate change. And then the last thing I'll say is, in terms of time, I did want the book to take place across a long span of time, because I wanted to show, I think, to me, the most important human character of the novel is Gabe. She's quite young when the novel opens. She's a child, and as the novel progresses, she becomes an adult. And so we get to see her human arc alongside Lilac's companion arc. And to me, they're really wonderful counterbalances to one another. And I also wanted to show Lilac as a product, and what would happen over time as the product, it enters the market, people are into the product, but then later, some people start to find it, scary, they're afraid of companions, they think it's immoral, unethical, and eventually the product is recalled. So it was important to me to show a companion's or a product's, span from sort of or origins to its very end when it's recalled.
Did you, I know that you live in Northern California, was there any travel involved, or are these just, did you write about places that you're just really familiar with, that you just know really well, or was there some kind of research that happened for the book?
There was definitely a bit of research for the book. I think in terms of writing about San Francisco and areas of Northern California, the book travels to Southern California too, which is where I went to grad school, and I also went to high school down there. So it's very familiar landscape for me. But as a geographer, I was quite interested in research and extrapolating out and thinking very specifically about how climate change would be affecting these places. The book also travels to Siberia, which I've never been to. Auckland Islands, I've also never been there. And for those sections, I had to do, a lot deeper research, which is my favorite part of writing, to be honest with you. And it's an opportunity to get to know these places that I have never been to, to do these deep research.
It sounds like, based on your background and just what I've read in the novel, that that place is a really important idea to you. And I really got a sense of that as I was reading The Companions. you mentioned in our interview a new project that you have that's based in Idaho. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I have two projects I'm kind of working on simultaneously. The one you're talking about is my new novel project, and I would say I'm about 2/3 of the way done with a draft of it. And it's basically about a pair of sisters who fall in love with male conjoined twins in a southern Idaho town that's being overrun by sovereign citizens. So there are some similar themes in terms of the body, connections with others, but it's also a totally different kind of book. It's very much about place because it's about this valley where there's a lot of ranchers, and there's this big debate about who should control public lands, whether it be the federal government or the local. So I dig a bit more into that, and playing, I think, with this, I like to write into the near future because I like the freedom to make things happen, whether it be an environmental, catastrophe or a new technology emerging, a group of sovereign citizens taking over a community. I love writing into the new future because it gives me sort of this, freedom to explore my whims, I guess.
Yeah. Do you feel like, we're in such an important moment currently. Do you feel like the current moment has affected how you're writing those two projects that you've been working on, or have you been working on anything else as a result of just this time that we're in right now?
Yeah, well, so I recently submitted a short story collection to my editor, and she's taking a look at it now, and that's supposed to come out within the next year. And it's basically a collection of interlinked, I like to describe it as a collection of interlinked personal and ecological disasters. And I would say, it's like the Companions, it walks that line between genres. There's a bit of horror, a bit of sci-fi, a bit of satire, a bit of noir. But most recently, I wrote a short story that's set in the Bay Area, and it's about a couple of tech workers who are a couple, and they live together and they work at home. And so it very much was tapping into my experience of trying to cohabit this home that I live in with my kids, share this space, and still, lead my own life in some way, which I found quite difficult. And I also am really interested in the way that the pandemic has sort of, I feel like if there's a problem in a relationship, it's heightened and brought to the surface in this one. There's no avoiding it or putting it off.
Right. Right.
So I wanted to write into that feeling as well.
Cool. Well, you have something that you'd like to read for us from the Companions?
Yeah, so I thought I would read from the middle of the first chapter. So as I mentioned earlier, it takes place 2 years since quarantine began, and it's set in a San Francisco tower. And it's narrated by Lilac, who's a 16-year-old companion to a young homeschool child named Dahlia. Now, she'll be talking directly to Dahlia, but she'll be thinking about her best friend, Nikki, because what Dahlia wants her to do all of the time is to tell and retell the story of her last day alive with Nikki. I awake fully charged, Dahlia smiling into my face. Hi, she says, munching on a brown breakfast bar that looks like excrement. I know exactly where I left off, but she does not ask me to continue. When I pause mid-story, I cannot stop thinking about the moment where I left off, trapped there, on pause with Nikki. I would not mind. It is nice to be with her, but I know she is just something I have saved to memory. I watch Dahlia at school, watch her exercise, watch her shop and socialize on the screen. She has a very structured schedule. During nap, I stare at the door, half open, listening for sounds of mother. Often, she uses nap time to smoke in the bathroom. My system registers the presence of airborne toxins, though I know from past experience not to sound an alarm. But today, There is no sign of smoke, no sign of mother. I have never been past this door yet. I can see how easy it is to pass into the hallway. And mother, she is not watching. She is not here. I do not make footsteps, and my whir, it is nearly below human hearing, and I want to see. Why can I not see? I hear Nikki's voice in my head, where I left off, playing on repeat. I want to feel it in my own skin. I am in the hallway, and nothing happens. No alarm sounds. No one comes to take me away. I am almost disappointed. The living room is what you would expect of a living room. There is a mauve sectional, a few potted plants, a shelf full of breakables, a coffee table made of plastic meant to resemble stone. A voice fills the room and I rev bump into the table, nearly toppling the lovely arrangement of fake flowers. The whole wall is alight with a man's solemn face. He talks of vectors and safety regulation extensions and assurances that public safety is the administration's top priority during what appears to be a second outbreak, a new strain of virus, this time in Los Angeles. Be quiet, I tell him, and he obeys, the wall returning to an even white. I enjoy it, this power. I have the urge to call him back so I can tell him to shut up again. But I am distracted by the collection of tiny breakables on the shelf, zeroing in on a crystal egg casting a rainbow on the wall. I reach for the egg, try to hold it, slippery in my awful hooks. Only it falls to the ground, shattering loudly. I want to shrink, but I am not made to compact. Mother's door creaks open and I wheel madly in reverse, flip around and rev into Dahlia's room, make like I am in sleep mode. Mother comes thumping in, cupping the broken base of the egg. Look what you've done. I fake startle out of sleep, see her bent over me, hand out the clutch of crystal. This belonged to my grandmother. It's worth more than you stupid. Dahlia is napping. Perhaps you should not yell. Get back in your closet. I zip away and Mother stands there, breathing heavy, pulse heightened. Then she stomps out, hurling the door shut. I know I have made a mistake and there will be consequences. I am supposed to be command-driven. Why can I not abide by my basic programming? There's something wrong with me. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Where can people find you online if they'd like to follow along with future things that are coming out or stuff that's happening with this book?
I'm on Twitter. My handle is @other_Katie. I'm on Instagram too. I don't really know what my handle is because I've only been there for a little bit, but you can find me there. Actually, probably the best place to start would be my website, which is katiemflynn.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We're going to bring Beth back, and if we have any questions from the viewers, she will ask those. So I think
I'm coming. I've added those links. Your Twitter handle and website are right over there in our chat. First question for you. Are you aware of AI-powered chatbots that enable people to have conversations with their deceased loved ones? We actually wrote about this in a previous issue of Alta. If so, what do you make of them? And were they in any way part of the inspiration for companions?
Well, I started writing, I wrote the first draft of the companions in 2013, and so I had not heard of that then. I have heard about it now, and, you know, it's a fascinating concept. And, you know, on one hand, I think that grief is a tough nut to crack, and that technology should and could be an incredibly important part of the grieving process. On the other hand, of course, my deep skepticism of technology, I worry that we become reliant on technology to help us get over or experience things that are very human and that take time. and that process has value to us. So per usual, I come in along the middle ground there.
One of the things, and I, where this is we're kind of like leading into sci-fi because again, we have this exciting science fiction. But we were talking about, before we went live to everyone else, Heather, Katie, and I were discussing science fiction TV shows and movies. And I feel like I would be remiss if we didn't kind of touch on Katie, what are your favorites? What are some shows or movies for fans of your work or hardcore sci-fi people that they might not know about?
Sure. Well, we were talking about Battlestar Galactica, so I'll just put that out there. Epic show, worth checking out for sure. I like books that walk that line between, and I would say this is true of all of my entertainment. I like things that walk that line between literary and genre. So I will say, for example, there's a really great book called Tentacle by Rita Indiana, which is set in a near future world. And, you have sort of, it's in Dominican Republic, it involves time travel. It involves like instantaneous sex change. It's got all sorts of, there's an outbreak and it's a fascinating story and a little bit out there.
This is by Rita Indiana?
Yes.
Got it.
Highly recommend it.
Got the link, everyone.
I'm curious if anyone has watched Upload yet. I've been afraid to watch it because I feel like I've thought about that concept for such a long time that I don't have any desire to go there. So I'm curious if anyone out there has watched it and thinks I should check it out.
I have not watched it. Best sci-fi movie of all time?
Best sci-fi movie of all time. I really like what's it called? Blade Runner. Sorry, brain freeze there.
I
love Philip K. Dick's stories, his zany stories, and I think that the original Blade Runner, I haven't even watched the new one, but the original Blade Runner is just like an excellent atmospheric movie and like a really good version of the story.
Well, we have no choice but to end on that note because we are exactly out of time. And when you get your new issue of Alta, there is a Philip K. Dick short story in here that was published in 1954, I think. I could be wrong. But we are, in fact, I can plug next week's Alta Ask Live. David L. Yulin, our books editor, will be here to discuss this issue and specifically the work of Philip K. Dick and its kind of influence on how we put this issue together, how its influence on science fiction as a genre. So please come back Wednesday, July 1st at 12:30 for that. Again, you can buy Katie's book, check it out with a green button right underneath us. That will take you to bookshop.org where you can support independent booksellers while supporting Katie. And Heather, of course, thank you. You are awesome in every way. Katie, thank you so much for joining us. This was really fun.
Thanks for having me. And thank
you.
Yeah, this
yeah. And if you've missed any part of this, I should say it'll be up on altaonline.com in a couple of hours. So if you want to relive all the magical moments, please go there. Thanks again, guys. Be safe. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.